My name is Lindsay Dorfman, and I am the Director of Branch Services and Operations at the Kent District Library. So thank you all for coming out tonight to our beautiful Cascade branch for what is, I am sure, to be a very informative evening. We are honored to partner with the World Affairs Council to present a series of programs called Give Peace a Chance. This week is National Library Week, which is a week to celebrate and observe the contributions of our nation's libraries and librarians, and also to promote library use and library advocacy. Here at the Kent District Library, we work to provide learning opportunities and resources that help to further all people. And we are thrilled to partner with the World Affairs Council of West Michigan to bring national experts right here to Kent County to talk on such an important topic as world peace. Before I introduce our speaker this evening, I want to remind the audience that both the Kent District Library and the World Affairs Council are both nonpartisan and non-advocacy organizations. We do not endorse or support any particular policy actions. Our missions are to educate and to promote civil discourse. Tonight, we will hear from Ann-Louise Colgan, who is the Director of Public Education at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Ms. Colgan joined the Ms. Colgan joined the USIP in 2010 after more than a decade of working at organizations focused on international human rights issues, peace and conflict in U.S. foreign policy. From human rights organizations to the Holocaust Memorial Museum, Ann-Louise developed and implemented plans to engage policymakers and to educate a broad public audience on issues of peace and conflict and other global priorities. Pretty impressive. Thank you. Tonight, she will share with us information on her organization's mission and the work that she does. She's also going to introduce a number of key tools in conflict management, stories of peace building in action, and also different ways for us to get involved. I hope you enjoy our time together, so please join me in introducing Ms. Ann-Louise Colgan.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I want to apologize up front for my voice. My toddler thought that now was the opportune moment to send me off to Michigan with his cooties, and so I'm struggling a little bit, so forgive me if I'm also relying a little bit on my water. But I want to thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm so happy to be here this evening. Thank you, Lindsay. I was connected with the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan last summer when I spoke to leaders from a range of World Affairs Councils across the country about plans for last year's International Day of Peace, which was coming up in September. And Erica Kubik then followed up with me about how we might further collaborate and find ways to connect your community here with USIP and our work. And we began conspiring by phone and by email, and all of that is what led me to be here with you this evening. I was at Aquinas College this morning, I was at Forest Hills this afternoon, and I'm thrilled to be here with you this evening to kick off your Give Peace a Chance series. And as a warm-up act to my dear friend George Lopez, who's going to be the speaker a week from now. This is my first time in Western Michigan. I lived in Ann Arbor, the part of the hand, 20 years ago after I graduated from college, but I never made it to the western part of the state, so I'm very happy to be here among you. And I want to make this as interactive and as much of an engaging discussion as possible. So I'm going to talk for a bit, but then I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions and answers, and for us all to have a chance to talk about what does it mean to give peace a chance in today's world. Does that sound good? Okay, great. So I'm here this evening to talk about peace in action, and I want to start by talking about my organization, whose mission is precisely that. Can I ask for a show of hands, how many of you have heard of the United States Institute of Peace? Okay. That's not uncommon. I'm frequently talking to audiences where no hands go up, so this is a good start. USIP is this country's nonpartisan national organization that works to prevent and resolve international conflicts without violence. And I always like to begin with a bit of history, because I think that's part of what makes us important and unique is our origin story and the purpose with which we were created. So when USIP was established, I hope that this works, there we go. When USIP was established in 1984, we were the result of long-standing efforts to create a national institution that was focused on peace. We were created by Congress and were funded by Congress to this day. And those leaders who envisioned us and who brought us into being were World War II veterans who were seared by that experience of war and wanted to prevent that kind of devastation from happening again. And they were seized by this idea that we have these national institutions, the military service academies, right, West Point, Quantico, Annapolis, where we train for war. And they felt that there should be a complement or a counterpart that was focused on peace. These congressional leaders included Senator Mark Hatfield of Oregon, who had commanded Navy landing craft on the beaches of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and Senator Spark Matsunaga of Hawaii, who had been twice wounded and awarded the Bronze Star in the war's North Africa and Italy campaigns. As these World War II veterans took greater roles in Congress, the push for a national organization focused on peace really began. And so starting in the 1960s, Hatfield and Senator Vance Hartke of your next door state of Indiana, also a World War II Navy veteran, introduced bills to establish a National Peace Academy. And as a member of the House of Representatives before he became a senator, Matsunaga introduced similar legislation in every Congress, starting with his election in 1962. In the 1970s, leaders in Congress were spurred on by a grassroots movement that added to the momentum around this idea. And so this campaign for a peace academy grew from an initial membership of just a few thousand people to an active constituency of tens of thousands of Americans all across this country who became vocal in pushing for congressional action to create this kind of an institution. And so pressure was growing inside Congress and outside Congress, and things finally began to move forward in the late 1970s, when President Carter established a commission to really study this idea. So if we were going to have a national institution that focused on peace, what would it look like? What kinds of things would it do? And over the next 2 years, the Matsunaga Commission, because it was chaired by Senator Matsunaga, traveled all across this country, held public hearings in 12 cities. They were informed by testimony from hundreds of witnesses. They did hundreds of surveys. They held private meetings. They examined proposals and approaches and existing institutions that were working on peace. And so this was a really thorough process that was informed by people all across this country. And the Commission concluded in a report in 1981 to the President and to Congress that the United States has a deep and abiding interest in international peace. It noted, in just this century, Americans have fought and died in 2 world wars, in Vietnam and Korea and other conflicts. We are experienced in the bitterness of war and we know its costs. And they concluded that there was a need and that it was timely for a federal institution to be created that would focus on research and education and training for peace. So the recommendations that came out of the commission led to legislation that was ultimately signed by President Reagan in 1984. And so recognizing the culmination of this long push that had really taken 2 decades, Senator Matsunaga spoke on the floor of Congress in 1984, and he said, "The Peace Academy is an idea whose time has come at long last." And so here's a picture of Senators Hatfield and Matsunaga with President Reagan in 1984 when the USIP Act was signed, creating USIP as an independent, non-profit national institute to serve the American people and the federal government through work to promote international peace and the resolution of conflicts among the nations and peoples of the world without recourse to violence. Today, USIP has been around for 33 years, and our work has evolved to include working directly in conflict zones, as some of you know well as providing analysis, education, and resources to those who are working for peace. And our presence in our nation's capital has also evolved. From rented office space for 2.5 decades to our headquarters today at the northwest corner of the National Mall, where we moved 6 years ago in 2011. This building is now the hub for the work that we do internationally. It gives us space for meetings, it gives us an ability to host really high-level events, but it's also a symbol. It represents this country's commitment to peace, and that's a tradition that we are proud to continue. The history that I just described to you started in 1960, but we can trace our roots, and we like to, all the way back to our first president, George Washington, who retired to his home in Mount Vernon and had grown so tired of war that he wanted a symbol of peace prominently displayed at his home. And so he commissioned a weather vane in the shape of a dove that to this day sits on the roof of Mount Vernon. And so we were proud to copy that and put that on top of the flagpole outside of our own building. So our building is significant and our location is significant. And I wish that you were in my building, though this library is beautiful because it's a really special space. We like to think of this, and let me just give you some perspective, as the War and Peace corner of the National Mall. So our building stands in very close proximity to memorials, very famous memorials to our country's great sacrifices in war, those same wars that inspired our creation. And we represent another important part of this country's story. In fact, we just released a new resource called the Peace Trail on the National Mall, which is a self-guided tour for tourists that highlights peace themes among the war memorials and other key sites at that corner in that neighborhood. So you have the Lincoln Memorial, which you can see there on the right, which remembers a president who held our union together after a really bitter war. The Dr. King Memorial, which is just tucked in those trees beyond the Lincoln, celebrates a man who dedicated his life to nonviolence. The Korean War Memorial, when you think about it, it remembers those who sacrificed in the first United Nations mission for peace after the Second World War. And so we like to draw out these themes because it's part of the thread that we now continue today, and we see ourselves as part of that history, and we're really proud to continue it. So what does it mean to build peace in today's world? Peace is a word that I often think gets a bad rap. And when I do quick word associations with people, when I say the word peace, what do you think of? People can be pretty skeptical. It can sound utopian, it can sound idealistic, fluffy, sort of disconnected from reality, especially in today's world when there are so many challenges and violent conflicts seem to dominate the international headlines, including this week. But I want to challenge those assumptions by talking about peace as something very practical, something that is urgent. Because the work for peace persists, even in the most difficult circumstances, even in places like Iraq and Afghanistan that are most known for war. And I think it's important to see this and to recognize it and to support and encourage it, because that's how we change the narrative and that's how we effect real change. What does it mean to be a peace builder today? How do we pursue peace in practice? What role can everyday people play in building peace in our world? I want to try to answer and address some of these questions by describing briefly how we at USIP do our work in practical terms. I want to give you some real examples to bring this to life and share with you some of the tools in our toolkit that really make this practical. And then I want to talk a bit about how we think you can learn more and engage with us, and I would love to hear your own thoughts on this as well. The number one question I get from people who've never heard of us and when they hear of us is, what do you all do? So you work for peace, what do you do? So USIP's core functions can basically be grouped into three categories. First of all, we think. So we are experts in this field. We produce research and analysis on particular conflicts and on key themes and trends that matter in international conflict and peace. We publish books, we publish materials, we testify to Congress. We have a fellows program that produces some of the best cutting-edge research on these issues today. And George Lopez, who's speaking here next week, I knew him first when he was a USIP fellow. We convene working groups among current and former officials when they're really grappling with a particular problem and they need to make a breakthrough. They need to get some of the best thinking on these issues. So we think, we're sort of thought leaders. But this is not just theory to us. We are active on the ground in conflict zones, and this is one thing that I think sets USIP apart. We have offices in Iraq and Afghanistan, in Tunisia, in Burma, and in Pakistan. But on any given day, colleagues from my office are traveling to Colombia, to Nigeria, to Central African Republic, to other places around the world, working on the ground with people who are living with conflict every day, giving them the tools and the skills they need to try to improve those situations. So this is really practical for us. And we are required by law, so I said we were congressionally funded, we are required by law to give a portion of our congressional funding every year in grants to smaller organizations that work for peace in different places around the world. So that's sort of a multiplier effect that we can have with those grants. And Dr. Pearson, in fact, who's speaking 2 weeks from now, was one of USIP's grantees, because we do support the field of peacebuilding study here in the US as well. The third real function that we have is educate. We teach and we train. We are an educational organization, and you remember me talking about this when I talked about our roots, right? This is core to who we are. We believe strongly that conflict is something that can be managed and even transformed if you have the right skills. So we want to give people the skills and the tools to manage conflict themselves. We have an academy that trains practitioners at our building and in the field, drawing participants from a range of other agencies and organizations. We have a global campus that's now online so that we can engage a global community of practitioners. And so we're working with the military, with diplomats, with religious leaders, with women leaders, with youth leaders, to give them skills and equip them to handle conflict without violence, and where it is possible to transform that conflict into positive change. So let me share some real examples, because this can all sound a little theoretical. So in Iraq, since 2003, we have been in Iraq. We've been providing assistance to civic groups and to government institutions that are involved in peace-building efforts. We have offices in Baghdad and in Erbil, and we're working to strengthen institutions and communities in their own efforts to prevent and resolve violent conflict. This is a country with a long history of communal conflict, so having this sort of peace-building capacity that we're helping to build is really important for immediate stability, but also for long-term progress. We have helped to facilitate peace agreements and reconciliation initiatives that have knitted communities back together after violent conflict. And to bring this idea to life, I always like to show pictures and show video whenever I can. I would like to share with you a video story. This is about 5 minutes long. This is a first-hand account by a military colleague, Lieutenant Colonel William Zemp of the United States Army, with whom we worked in Iraq in a particularly tough situation. And so this is what peace building looks like in practice.
Peace building can be possible, even in the most difficult circumstances. Mahmoudiya, a thriving city in Iraq, had been called the gateway to Baghdad. But by 2007, violence was at its peak. Local Sunni and Shia tribes and al-Qaeda insurgents were locked in a vicious cycle of violence and revenge. Many people had been killed, many more forced from their homes. Trade and transportation had been shut down. The district had become known as the Triangle of Death. U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel William Zemp of the 101st Airborne Division was there.
My name is Lieutenant Colonel William Zemp of the United States Army, and I'm an American soldier. The conditions when we got there were horrific. This is probably the best way to characterize it. It was not uncommon for people to be beheaded in the streets. The quality of life for the general population was dismal at best. The conditions were changing though.
In the early months of 2007, combined U.S. and Iraqi forces and tribal militia had made progress in tamping down the violence and expelling al-Qaeda.
With the change in the strategy and the political backing that we had during the surge, we had the resources for the first time in that area to truly bring some sort of stability where the norm could change. The local leaders were courageous enough to come forward at that time.
Iraqi leaders asked U.S. forces for support to help them seize this window of opportunity for a peace-building initiative.
You get to a certain point where the fighting is only going to get you a certain amount of returns. And everyone is either to a point where they're defending what they fought for, or they're trying to get back things that they've lost. Up until that time, because of the fighting, we could only engage the interest of each one of the tribal leaders individually. What was missing was the ingredients of a formalized process to bring the players together.
The U.S. military and the Department of State called on the U.S. Institute of Peace for help. With support from U.S. and Iraqi troops and working with Iraqi partners, USIP spent 4 months carefully studying the situation, building relationships, and rebuilding trust between tribal leaders. The process culminated in a 3-day reconciliation conference, which was led by the network of Iraqi facilitators, supported and trained by USIP.
31 sheikhs from all the tribes got together at the Al Rashid Hotel there in Baghdad and worked through the framework for how the conditions would be for communication forward. It was the first time we could have that dialogue away from the stress of the violence that was happening on a daily basis. That ended with the signing of the formal declaration. For the first time, we were able to define what peace could look like. The Reconciliation Conference was the result of the hard work of a lot of players. The unit before us was the 2nd Brigade of the 10th Mountain Division, and what those soldiers did was remarkable. The Iraqi military was involved. The Iraqi population, the sheikhs themselves were involved. We were also fortunate enough to have the Department of State and the U.S. Institute of Peace. There's considerable value in civilian and military organizations working together in situations like these. There's extreme value in those relationships, but I would go even as far to say that they're necessary to any success that can happen in any of these conflict areas.
During its first 6 months in the Mahmoudiya district, Lieutenant Colonel Zemp's battalion and the Iraqi security forces were engaged almost daily by enemy attacks. In the months after USIP began the reconciliation process, the number of attacks was significantly reduced.
And in the end, the impact that it had on the Iraqi population was substantial. We went from it not being uncommon for people within the urban areas to be beheaded, for mass grave sites to be discovered, to the extreme of actually open markets, basically overnight, and then bringing commerce in from the villages surrounding. If we didn't have people there to help guide us, we would have just seen it through the prism of war and not looked for the opportunities that some of these resolutions could have helped with.
So I talked a few moments ago about how at our core we're an educational institution. Since 2003 in Iraq, we had been training facilitators so that they would be ready when situations like this arose. In countries that are dealing with enormous violence, there's not always opportunities to try to reach a peace agreement. Sometimes things are just so hot and so tense. But when there are these moments, it's really important that we can seize them. And so we had helped to train and then we helped to guide this process that was led by the Iraqis themselves. And so that was really significant for them. It was locally driven, locally owned. And as I said, it's a peace agreement that has held for a decade. And so, you know, we go back periodically, we talk to folks who were there, and so it didn't completely end every type of violence there, but it rebuilt trust and it rebuilt communication. And it enabled people to have some basic agreement on some principles that really matter to them. And so that is a pretty powerful example that we talk about in our work. Have we lost everything?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We're correcting somebody.
Okay, no, it's okay. So we're going to keep going. So pretend I just showed you that video. And I have more slides, but if we don't get to them, then it's totally fine. So I talked about the network of Iraq. Can you hear me all okay? Yes. Okay, so I talked about the network of Iraqi facilitators. They had been so instrumental in what had happened in Mahmoudiya, and then they have played important roles in other parts of Iraq in the meantime. And so the next example that I want to share with you, it's okay.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
We had beautiful slides. It's okay. Is everyone okay if we just keep going? Okay. So in Tikrit, which is another part of Iraq, there was a moment in early and mid-2014 when ISIS swept in to the north of Iraq. And there was a massacre that happened at a place called Camp Spiker. And you might have heard about this in the news. 1,700 young cadets were murdered at this military base near Tikrit. And this was obviously a terrible tragedy in its own right, but it led to this moment of enormous tension between Sunni and Shiite communities. And some communities, some families fled because they were so concerned that this was going to be this cycle of violence, this revenge killing. And so again, we were able to partner with local organizations and with our Iraqi facilitators to intervene and open up channels of communication. And so again, we went in and we studied what's happening here and ultimately mediated a conference that identified concrete steps for reconciliation. And the process was very similar to what you would have seen in the Mahmoudiyya video. And it was again led by the Iraqi facilitators. And as a result of that intervention, within maybe 9 months, 400 families returned to Tikrit, which was sort of the start. That was making a really important statement. It was a big gesture for them. And then by a year later, 268,000 people had returned. So these are people who came back to their homes because the situation had been sufficiently stabilized as a result of an intervention that was led by Iraqis who had been trained and who were guided by us. So that's an example of what we've done in Iraq. In Afghanistan, we've likewise been active for well over a decade, working with local and international partners in government and in civil society. We're working to address the immediate political crisis, but also working on efforts to strengthen rule of law, to reduce violent extremism. And I had some pictures that I wanted to show you of our work. I'll just mention a couple of things. So we're working with universities because, when we hear about violence in Afghanistan, when it reaches the level of the news, when it reaches national attention, it's reached a certain threshold of violence. So it's large car bombings or it's large military attacks. But the reality is that the source of most conflict in Afghanistan is over pretty basic issues, access to land or status or access to basic resources. So now we have unprecedented numbers of Afghans who are attending university, and we've been working with universities in Afghanistan to create conflict resolution curriculum so that these young people are empowered with skills to address small-scale conflicts before they can escalate and before they can be exploited by warlords or by the Taliban. And so these undergraduates not only have told us how much more empowered they feel, but they are literally going back to their own communities and practicing local mediation and other peace-building projects in ways that really make a difference at a local level. And so I had some photos I wanted to show you of the Peace Club in Galrashat, which is one of the universities with which we've been working. In Afghanistan a couple of years ago, we did a violence prevention effort around the provincial and presidential elections. And this was a really important moment, a real test for Afghanistan. We worked through a range of different means. We promoted candidate forums, we did a rap video contest for young people, we had efforts to boost women's participation, about getting people to understand that you can make a vote for peace, and trying to have as much turnout as possible and trying to minimize the risk of violence. And as a result of that effort, in which there were lots of other partners, the risk that people were concerned about of election-related violence really didn't come to pass. We work in other places as well. So we have a big investment in Iraq and Afghanistan, but we're also working in places like Nigeria with governors who are dealing with Boko Haram and the threat and the reality of violent extremism, helping them to come together, share experiences, figure out what are some strategies they can deal with. We've worked for a long time in Colombia, where a peace agreement, as some of you may have heard, was maybe a year ago finalized, ending 50 years of conflict. We know that most peace processes, at least half of peace processes fail. The ones that make it, the ones that tend to be more durable, are ones that are more inclusive and that have broader participation of stakeholders. And so we've been working to have women included, to have minority voices included. We've trained women facilitators and mediators in Colombia. So that's been, I think, an important moment of progress in this hemisphere. We're working a lot in Burma, which is going through its own really complicated transition right now, transitioning from a time of armed conflict through this peace process with 21 different armed groups, which is incredibly complex, and at the same time transitioning from a previous, having been a closed society, to now democracy. And so there's a lot that's going on in Burma. There's a real risk of interreligious and other forms of communal conflict, and so we're working at the local level with leaders, religious leaders and others there to try to diffuse those tensions. In each of these places, the circumstances are different, the challenges are diverse, the realities on the ground are always dynamic and complex, but there's a common peace-building toolkit that we can bring to bear that helps us make sense of situations. And again, if I had my slides, I had a nice graphic to show you. One of the things that I wanted to show you was the peace-building pyramid, so I'll do this. So the peace-building pyramid is one of the frameworks that we can use in thinking about peace-building. And so it's divided really into 3 segments. At the top level, which is the top of the pyramid, you have the leaders, the elites, the decision makers in any conflict situation. So those who are negotiating at the table, those who have the power. The next level down, which is slightly more people, is the mid-level leaders. So those who are influential in any society, religious leaders, maybe mid-level political leaders. And then at the bottom you have those who are most numerous in any society, who are closest to the actual living the violence, who are the kind of the grassroots people. So we know in our work, in most of the places where we work, conflict can happen within those levels and across those levels. And so what we talk about a lot in our work is the fact that peace building has to happen top down as well as bottom up. And so this is what we have seen in places where peace processes have worked and have really held. If you have a peace agreement that is signed by those at the top of the pyramid, but there's no connection to broader needs and priorities, then it's probably not going to hold. It's not going to change anything. Likewise, if you have a small-scale peace-building project that affects at the grassroots, but that's not connected to anything bigger, then you can't scale it up. And so time and again in the places where we've really seen progress made, you can refer back to the pyramid as one helpful framework that helps you understand what's happening and understand the importance of being able to deal with things at multiple levels. Conflict analysis is one of the core concepts and one of the main tools in our toolkit wherever we work. This is basically the idea that you need to really understand a situation before you can think about how to address it, how to approach it. And so you go in and you analyze it. You try to understand what's going on here, who are the players, what's their relationship, what are the issues, what are the dynamics. And by mapping it out, by getting all these pieces on the table, you can start to find opportunities that you might not have thought of, and you can start to really understand where you might be able to make an impact. Another key tool in our toolkit is communication. It's something we all do all the time. Probably don't do it as effectively as we might. And in conflict situations, effective communication is a high-stakes thing. And so we train people in communication skills that enable them to make their own case persuasively, but also to listen. And when we talk about communication, we tend to focus a lot on the presentation part, not so much on the receiving part. Another of the tools in our toolkit is dialogue, which is a really specific process of communication. And I work a lot with students, I work a lot with high school students who are very familiar with debate and know that this technique of debate, which is about winning, about making the strongest argument, about poking holes in your opponent's argument. Dialogue is the opposite of that. Dialogue is the ability to have a conversation with somebody else who has different views than you, to have your views be informed by their perspective. And you don't have to agree with them at the beginning, you don't even have to agree with them at the end, but you have to be able to listen to them and to recognize that you're getting something from that exchange. Then you have negotiation and mediation are the two other main tools that probably people are most familiar with. Negotiation is sort of this process of compromise and bargaining, which really takes some skill, and especially in situations of conflict. And then mediation is when you have a third party, a respected independent third party mediator who comes in and helps to reach an agreement. So those are some of the tools. I mentioned them roughly in sequence, so you usually start with analysis, then communication, and then the tools of peacemaking. But so we can use those in different places, but I think what's common to peace building in all of the places in which we work is that it's really about people. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that, and so I really like to emphasize it. All of our work is only made possible because we're working in partnership. And when we think about what it means for there to be violent conflict in particular places, it's really important, I think, for all of us to remember that these are people who have hopes and dreams and fears and who are oftentimes just struggling to find a better life for their families. So that's something that drives me in the work that I do, and it's something that kind of putting a human face on this is, I think, really important. I work a lot with teachers as well, who are always looking for these human stories that they can share with their students that really bring these ideas to life, because it really is all about people. Here in this country, so most of USIP's work takes place in these conflict zones that I've mentioned. There's another element of our work, though, that is about serving the American people, and that's what my job and my team's job is. To work with students and educators and groups like you and folks like you all across this country to help people understand how conflicts can be resolved without violence, how peace is possible and practical, and what are some of the ways that you can learn more and get involved. And so the fact that you are here this evening is wonderful. That's a terrific start. My organization has a terrific new website that we have recently relaunched that is really a go-to resource if you're interested in learning more about any of the places that I talked about, any of the places that you're seeing on the news. We have really great analysis on there. You can buy our longer books, but we have a blog that has sort of shorter analytical pieces that are really well written. My program has a lot of resources that are dedicated and tailored for students and teachers. So we run contests for high school students to help them to learn about conflict and peace. They can win trips to DC, they can win a little bit of money for college, so there's nice incentives there. We work with teachers to give them tools to bring peace building into their classroom, and I can talk more if any of you are interested about what that work looks like with educators. Every year, the International Day of Peace is in September 21st. World Affairs Council of Western Michigan has been active the last couple of years. It is our mission at the U.S. Institute of Peace to try to turn the International Day of Peace into something that has a high profile and something that is about active engagement. So rather than even just knowing about it is a good thing, but we try to encourage people to do something for peace on that day. It can be something really little, or it can be something bigger. You can organize an event, you can raise money for a charity that you're concerned about, but the idea is to get people to do something. We call it the Peace Day Challenge. And so we worked with people in 21 states in the first year, 43 states in the second year. We're hoping to reach all 50 this year. And so that's an easy way for you to plug in and be part of that bigger umbrella effort, and we'll really start to gear up for that over the course of the summer. And I guess I'll just end on sort of a personal note, which is to say that this work is really personal for me. I grew up in Ireland. I've lived in DC for 18 years. I grew up in Ireland, right on the border with Northern Ireland, and right at a time when there was a violent civil war that was raging just a few miles from where I lived. And it had been that way. They called it the Troubles. Great euphemism. It had been that way my whole life, and it seemed intractable, and it was often held up as one of those conflicts that would never be resolved. There's the Northern Ireland conflict and the Israel-Palestine conflict. Those are just never, ever going to be resolved. And so we just lived with it, and it was really, frankly, pretty terrifying to be there, and that really loomed large over my childhood. And then you reach this moment in the mid-90s, sort of like the window of opportunity that I described in Iraq, though it looks different in different places, where you had people at the community level who just didn't want this to continue anymore. Parents, teachers, community leaders, they just were done with it. You had political leaders who were at a point where they were sort of stalemated, and they were willing to come to the negotiating table. And you had an American senator, George Mitchell, who was a respected mediator and who committed himself to finding a breakthrough. And everybody was skeptical. Nobody thought that this was going to work. And it did. And so in April of 1998, 19 years ago, they signed a peace agreement that has held for 19 years. And I'm still sort of shocked by that. It was not perfect. It almost never is. There is lots of work still to be done. But the fact that we were talking at Aquinas College this morning with the professor who said that a few years ago he went to Ireland, he drove across the border, he couldn't see the border. He drove back over, he couldn't see it, and he had to stop somebody and say, "Where's the border?" And they said, "Oh, it used to be right here." When I was growing up, that was the most heavily militarized, fortified border you could possibly imagine. Guards with full military armor, and just barbed wire everywhere. It was really crazy. And so the fact that peace is possible in that context gives me hope for everywhere. And so I'm very passionate and very optimistic. When people push back and say that peace seems elusive, peace seems something unattainable, it's only possible if we really believe in it and if we really work for it. And I think it's really important for young people to hear that message, because it's so easy to be overwhelmed by what's happening in the world today. I'm very proud to work where I do. I'm really proud to have opportunities to talk about this work, and hopefully to find ways to continue to keep you engaged and to support you in what you're interested in and what you're doing, because I think that's how we make change, and that's what makes peace into something active. So thank you so much. I'm happy to answer questions. Hope we can have a good conversation. Sorry about the PowerPoint. We worked really hard on it. That's sort of miserable. But thank you. So does anyone have any questions? What's your name?
I'm going to try and turn this on and then pass the mics around. And actually, I'll have Courtney before we get started on that. I'll have you turn it on. It's on. Okay. Boy, I'm great. Go here and then Catherine.
Do you do any work in training our military leaders, as they're certainly involved in this whole process?
When you say this whole process, you mean the process of peace building?
Or and transition to peace, yes.
Yeah. So we work very closely with the military, and sometimes it's at a high level where we're sort of having off-the-record conversations to help them think through how we can be a complement to what they're doing. We do work on occasion with the service academies and with the Peacekeeping and Stability Operations Institute, where people are really grappling with these issues at a sort of a strategic and a tactical level. And we have certainly worked closely with the military in the field in Iraq and in Afghanistan. So it has looked a little bit different in different contexts. But I mean, the military, the folks we work with in the military will be the first to tell you how important it is to have this sort of relationship and how important it is to have folks who can come in alongside or after the military to try to heal these communities and try to prevent conflict from resurfacing. And so that has been a really important part of what we've been engaged with, ever since 9/11.
Perhaps engaging in some of the officer education courses, as not just at the academy, for the starting out, but the career courses and...
Absolutely, and we did this when I was at the Holocaust Museum also. There's a whole professional education program there where they're working with the folks at Command and Staff College of Quantico and the more senior kind of professional development avenues at the military. So, yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, you were speaking about Colombia.
Yeah.
And I've been there twice, met friends, and I had no idea how much this civil war had gone on or how it affected people's lives. Can you give us some tips, or ideas, how you worked with these FARC guerrillas? Now, supposedly there's peace, but obviously these aren't going to be very popular people.
Yep.
How do you deal with these people who have been in the real thick of it, that there's a lot of hate and bad memories and resentment? How do you work with that?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in two ways. The first is our work in Colombia that has taken place over many years did not always directly engage the FARC. It engaged other parts of civil society that were working on the peace process. And so that involved giving grants to organizations that were working to keep youth away from being involved in the violence and giving them creative outlets, supporting these women mediators, and so on. There are some parallels between Colombia and Northern Ireland, right? So you have places in which there is a very, very long conflict, and you have parties where there's a military wing and a political wing, and the political wing is at the negotiating table, but there's a military side of it as well that has been fueling the conflict. My general philosophy, and I'm speaking only on my own behalf here, but my general philosophy is that people can change. I saw that with my own eyes. There were people who committed some really pretty terrible things, or who were maybe in the command structure for terrible things that happened in Northern Ireland, who subsequently took power and actually turned out to really be constructive in government. And so I think there's always the hope that people can be good faith participants in what happens after a peace agreement. But it is very difficult to heal a society that has been riven by conflict for 5 decades. I mean, that's longer than most people's memories. It's all that people have known. And so that's why this work at the grassroots level at reconciliation really matters. And you have to hope that over time, peace agreements give people enough that's positive that they want to attach to it, that over time, those who are spoilers or those who are not really part of the process can either be sidelined or can be brought into it. It's really complicated. And the situation in Colombia, where the peace agreement was voted down by the people, it just goes to show how complicated this is. It never ends with the peace agreement. It often only is starting really with the peace agreement. But I think that gives them a basis on which to go forward. And it's our job at USIP, and it's the job of the rest of the US government and others in the international community to focus on this good news story and to try to be as supportive as we can to make sure that it sticks. And that there's not a relapse, because so many peace agreements end up failing or countries end up relapsing, and so it's sort of a fragile moment, and it's important that we figure out the questions that you're asking. Those are exactly the right questions. We're working on that from multiple angles, but everybody needs to be a part of the solution, and it's going to be difficult.
So I work in resettlement here in Grand Rapids with refugees from around the world, but the most that we are receiving in the last few years are from Congo, from the Great Lakes region of Africa. Do you have any work there? And what kind of things are you seeing? Because the stories we hear is just still the circle of violence, and there's just so much, and sometimes it feels like it's so complex that what really is the solution there? Because a lot of people are suffering, people are dying. So what are you doing in those regions?
Well, and it's interesting because, so in my past life, when I first came to the US, I worked at an organization that focused on Africa. And so I worked for 8 years on Congo, because that was when that country was really in its most hot period of war. It's incredibly complicated, and it's not in the news as much as it was. Not even Eastern Congo is in the news as much as it was, which sometimes leads people to think that the crisis is not there anymore, and that is not at all the case. But USIP is not really working there. We have worked a little bit recently in the Central African Republic, which is in sort of the same neighborhood. There are lots of other organizations that are working on DRC, especially human rights organizations. And I know that the refugee resettlement organizations have been dealing a lot with people who have come out of Congo. It's not an area on which USIP has worked. And I'm not sure that we will be engaging there anytime soon, but I know that a lot of other organizations are. If you want to follow up with me, I'm happy to connect you with some of those folks, but it's not something that I can speak to. Sure.
My question was, is really, several of the examples that you gave were where people were willing to come together and realize that there was another side. But do you guys get involved in conflicts where everybody is so dug in that there's no willingness to move to the other side? And what kits, what types of tools are there that you use in those situations?
Yeah, it's a great question. And by my sharing the examples of when we were able to achieve a peace agreement, I don't want to at all suggest that it was easy, because it really wasn't. I mean, it's not like we went in and they all were like, oh, well, we do really want to talk to each other, so happy you're here, let's go. It's not like that at all. And so it really takes a lot of hard work, and it's very complicated. There's no point in us going in somewhere where nobody wants us. And so we don't do that. We're not large enough to have the luxury to be all over the place. But it is very much the case that we are going into places sometimes where certain parties want us to be there, and others really are not persuaded. Or they might be persuaded by the idea of reaching an agreement, but they don't know if they can trust us. They don't really know what is our agenda. And so it's really, really difficult. And these are bumpy processes. It's not linear either. And so you might be making some progress, and then all of a sudden something happens in the news, and then you went forward 1 step and you're back 3 steps. It's really, really difficult. The way you do it is painstaking, building trust, listening, having it locally driven to the extent possible, which is why it really matters to have local Iraqi facilitators or Afghan facilitators or Tunisian facilitators who understand far better than we ever could what's really going on here. And then if there are people who are spoilers, as I said, you have to try to bring them into the process, so find something that resonates with them, or try to marginalize them to the extent you can so that they're not going to derail everything. We talk a lot in conflict resolution about ripeness, this idea of whether a conflict is ripe for an intervention. There are certainly times where we will go in places where somebody will have asked us for help. We'll go in and we'll realize, you know what, we really can't be helpful right now. And we're sorry, and there are others who can be, and so let's put you in touch with them. But, I mean, we can't answer every problem, and it's really, really difficult. And even the Mahmoudiyya story that I would have shown you in the video, when we finally reached the point where these people were willing to come together in a hotel, and it had to be so heavily fortified and secured because there was so much tension and so much violence that had come before, and there was a bombing that happened right on the security perimeter the day before the conference was supposed to happen, which scared everybody, and so it almost scuttled the whole thing. And so, there will always be people who don't want to see progress for various reasons, or who are skeptical, and it's our job to just make the best case that we can, or facilitate a process that helps others make that case. And if people are not willing to play, then to try to keep them away so that the people who are constructive can really have their opportunity.
Hi. I just want to say thank you first for what you do. I'm sure you're hands full right now. Would you kindly speak about any initiatives or analysis that you have done for North Korea, and any kind of preventive measures to avoid?
I should have been prepared for this question, and I'm not. Our former president, USIP's former president, was an expert on China and on East Asia. So under his tenure, we did a lot of work in that part of the world. We haven't as much lately. If you want to follow up with me, I'm very happy to talk to my colleagues and to try to get you some answers. I don't think we're doing much right now. The focus has really been much more on the Middle East and on Asia for the last number of years. Remember, we're congressionally funded, and so we're really trying to be where it is most strategically useful for us to be. A lot of times we're working in places where the US military is engaged. I think this question of North Korea is going to continue to loom even larger. I mean, North Korea and Syria are the two that are in the news right now. We're not working in Syria largely because of issues of access. We're not really working on North Korea. And that, you know, the situation's evolving. We're gonna see what this might end up looking like for my organization and more broadly. So I'm sorry I can't give you more than that, but I'm happy to follow up with you and try to connect you where I can.
Can you sort of speak on how big is your organization? How many permanent employees? Do you have doctorates? And in the areas, do you then target certain groups to target areas of the country, areas of the world that you want to attack? And how do you handle the language barriers?
Great questions. So USIP has not quite 300 employees total. So we have 186 in our headquarters in Washington, and then just about 100 in these different countries that I mentioned. So Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Burma, and Tunisia. In those countries, we are working a lot with people from those countries. So a lot of my colleagues in the Iraq office or in the Afghanistan office are locals. They're from Iraq, they're from Afghanistan. So that's how we get around cultural challenges, language barriers, that sort of thing. The people with whom we work in different places really depends on the context. So in some places we're working with religious leaders. In some places we're working with youth leaders. It really depends on the type of initiative in a particular place. So one of the issues for which we were best known from the mid-90s, really until 9/11, was our work on religion and peace building. And we had worked quite a bit in the central part of Nigeria, where there was a lot of tension between Muslim and Christian communities that would occasionally spark violence, where hundreds of people would be killed and thousands of people would be displaced. And there were these amazing visionary leaders, they called them the pastor and the imam, because they were a pastor and an imam, who created the Interfaith Mediation Center in Nigeria, where they tried to bring people together from their respective communities and then trained them in the skills of peace building, and then deployed them back to their communities to really be peace builders in reality. And so in the early 2000s, it led to a peace agreement in that part of Nigeria, which has held for 15 years, in spite of flashpoints all around them. So that's in Nigeria. We've worked a lot with governors and with religious leaders. In Tunisia, we're working with student leaders, because the student unions there are really the main mode of political activism and expression for young people as the democracy starts to really get hold in Tunisia. There are also real threats of violent extremism, and so sometimes this political expression in Tunisia can really quickly escalate to violence. So we're working with student leaders to give them skills in how to communicate, how to have disagreements, how to advocate for what you believe in without it necessarily leading to really difficult conflict, and working with locals in Tunisia. Journalists, lawyers, teachers who were training as facilitators to help work with those young people. In Burma, we're working in some cases with the police, with the security forces, to train them in how to deal with community grievances without resorting to violence. It's not dissimilar to what you see some communities here in this country doing. But by law, we are required to work internationally, and so we don't do work here in the US, but there are a lot of parallels between what we're doing to resolve conflicts overseas and things that might be useful or things that might be happening in this country. So it looks different in different places.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have time for one last question.
Thank you for being here, for giving this talk. You've talked mostly about giving advice and assistance, facilitation in the context of society in which there are groups in conflict, immediate conflict. So I'm asking whether, I want to ask whether there are other kinds of work that you do. For instance, well, I was curious about whether you're ever called for domestic things in the US. Are there times when that happens? And also, are you doing anything on the fronts of nuclear security globally?
So we are not called for advice on the US, though the resources that we offer for educators are about the skills of conflict resolution, which can be applied anywhere, interpersonally, in our communities here, just as they are applicable overseas. We're not doing a lot of work right now on nuclear issues, but we have in the past. In the mid-2000s, we convened one of those working group commissions on strategic posture of the U.S. and kind of the future of nuclear security, which became sort of a blueprint that was adopted and that was taken into policy by the tail end of the Bush administration. And so we have experts in-house who have deep expertise on nuclear issues, often overlapping with parts of the world where that is really salient. But I don't know of any events we've had or anything we've really published lately that's on that question. But of course, given what's in the news right now, that could very easily change. Does that answer your questions? Okay, sure. I want to thank you all for coming out. I mean, I know Eric is going to say a closing, but it's really such a pleasure to be here. This is a gorgeous library, by the way. I'm very impressed. But thank you all for being interested, for giving up your Thursday night to come out here. I would be delighted to be in touch with any of you. If you're interested in following up, I can give you my card, or Erica or Lindsay will know how to reach me. But thank you. This is a really important topic, and I hope that you'll come back next week and hear George, who's wonderful. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Colgan, not only for giving such a great presentation tonight, but also selling the series for us, knowing some of the folks who are coming ahead. This is, I think, a conversation that we need to continue to have, and so we're so grateful that you were here tonight to get that started. Couple things, Kathy Dopp in the back. She is the hostess with the mostest who helps to facilitate a little after-lecture discussion. Tonight it's going to be at the Cascade Row House, and will be for every event in the series. But again, as Ms. Colgan mentioned, we've got 2 more events coming up. Just a note, next week it will be on Wednesday, not Thursday. So Wednesday, April 19th, we hope to see you here for Dr. George Lopez. And then finally, on your way out the door, please stop by our information table to learn a little bit more, not just about the World Affairs Council, but we also have information about the USIP that you can pick up on your way out as well. But we hope to see you next week, and thank you again for coming tonight.